Okay, I welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is an audio and video show where we interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. Now, I've done this podcast for about 80 episodes, and I realized that one of the most important reasons I started this podcast was to create a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet, where we hold space for each other and where we slowly start to appreciate the amount of time, effort, love, and sacrifice that it takes to build a career in any field. So, today, I'm really excited to speak to a friend and someone whose work I've been really inspired by, not just in a professional capacity, but also beyond that as well. So, Diya Sengupta, a little bit about Diya before we jump into this conversation. So, Diya lives in Bombay and works as a sustainability strategy leader in a global strategy and consulting firm. Born in Durgapur, Bengal, Diya grew up across mining towns in Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh, owing to her father's transfer prone job with Coal India Limited. Her reading and writing comes from fond memories of growing up in India's hinterlands. She's an avid reader, passionate book reviewer, and is the curator of Juhu Reads, Mumbai's earliest and my favorite silent reading community. And that's where the connection actually happened. We are both part of the same silent reading community. I, as a participant, and Dia as the curator. And she's done a wonderful job building this community and space in a city like Mumbai that's always in a rush. I feel like every weekend when I go to Juhu Reads, it's one of those spaces where I feel like the city is finally not in a rush and people are just sitting and reading together. And Dia will tell us more about the idea of a silent reading community and her thoughts behind it. And they've done over 100 plus meetings. I was recently at their 100th community meetup. And it is just such a wonderful experience. And, there's no costs involved right now. And people just come together and read. But more on that later. But now we come back to Dia's story. So, Dia, thank you so much for making time for this. I'm really excited about this conversation. And the first question I always start the podcast off with, Dia, is tell me some stories from your childhood. You mentioned in your intro that you grew up across India, and I've read some pieces that you shared with me early, and there were so many stories of you reading and observing the world as a child. And I'm really curious about things you remember of your childhood, because as readers we often think about that in the terms of other characters' stories in the books we read. So today, the story in the book is your life. So tell me stories from your childhood, and thank you again for doing this. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhishek. So happy to be here. Honestly, this is my first podcast. I have listened to a lot of your previous podcasts, and something which makes me very happy is to talk about books and childhood because I think people have forgotten how to become children again in this fast paced world. So, talking about my very unique childhood, I think the first thing which comes to my mind is just trees and green everywhere. So, I grew up in really small mining towns in MP, UP, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, as you mentioned in the introduction. So, my father was posted with Coal India Limited. And as you know, with all government organizations, every 5, 6 years, there's a transfer that happens and which you need to take. So at that point in time, my mother was not working, but eventually she also joined a school when we went to MP. But primarily, I was born in Durgapur in West Bengal, where even my grandparents were. So my grandfather was a doctor. In fact, he was a part of the British Coal Company, the company which was before Coal India. So pre-independence, he was a doctor there. And I think my parents had an arranged marriage like it was in those days. And I was born in Durgapur where my grandparents lived. And then after the first 7 years of my life, which I spent in a small place called Asansol, it's very close to Durgapur. It's again a coal mining town where we have underground mines. So we used to live in these huge bungalows, which were like almost 10-15 kilometers away from the main town, even more than that. So we just had trees, that's it, and there was nothing else. I mean, the house was very unique because if you had to travel from one place to other, you had to obviously drive down, take your car. There were no public transport available. We had to walk long distances. To even go to the school bus, we had to walk almost 20 minutes every morning from our home to the school bus. So I grew up in such places, and access to public library, as I was talking about it to a friend the other day, we had no public library. The only library we had was in our school. But again, in school, how much time do you spend in a library? It's just one period every week. That's not enough. So in my house, my parents had a lot of books because both my parents are avid readers. Though they read in Bengali primarily, my mother and my father, they also read in English, but I grew up with a lot of Bengali literature. So, I mean, although I studied Bangla till class fourth, which is when my father got transferred, but the initial letters of the Bangla language stuck to me. So I could even read Bangla beyond that. But we grew up on a lot of classic literature. Oliver Twist, for example, because Charles Dickens, we read a lot of them, and they were all in the abridged form because we didn't have access to the bigger books or the full books. And for children, they were the only ones available. So my first book was, in fact, an abridged copy of Oliver Twist when I was about 6 years of age, which my father bought from, I think, the Calcutta Book Fair, which at that point in time was one of the largest book fairs, probably in the world, not now anymore. And then eventually I grew up reading Enid Blyton, as most of us kids of the 90s did. And then as I grew up, I got introduced to Jane Austen. But again, this was very typical of readership those days because of a lack of a public library. The school libraries were mostly devoted to typical books like, which I just mentioned. But again, back home, because we had a huge collection of books, and also my grandparents, especially my maternal grandmother, was a very big reader of books, mostly Bangla literature. So she was a big influence in my life, and so were my parents. And that's how I grew up, reading amongst the open skies, probably climbing a mango tree or a guava tree with a piece of guava in my hand and reading the book on a Sunday afternoon because there was nobody else to play with. There were no shopping malls to go, there were no movie theaters. So what do you do as a child, right? You just read a book. So that's how I grew up in my childhood.
And like, I'm thinking about what you said about your parents being readers, and I always find that quite intriguing, because whenever I've asked someone who's a reader now, they always have an adult in their life who was probably a reader around them. And it's a correlation. You can't completely equate it to that. But off the top of your head, do you remember the kinds of books that your mom and your dad, your parents loved reading? If you could tell me, because you told me they read in Bangla, and I find that really interesting. And uh, because in India we speak so many different languages, right? We speak English for work, we have our mother tongue. Hindi is like what we use on a day-to-day basis. So not a lot of countries have that advantage of being multilingual, and not just multilingual, but trilingual in that sense. So tell me some stories about what your parents read, Diya, and what were your memories of the books that they read.
Yeah, so I think my parents, my mom used to read a lot of Rabindranath Tagore, his writing, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. They are the classic Bengali writers, right? So, in fact, I remember now those books are not there, but we had the entire edition of these books, right? 10, 12, 15 hardbound books. And I think those days, it was really a very big event to show your books off to people, right? So we didn't have these fancy gadgets to show. So your books were your most prized possessions. And my mom, I remember she told me that when she got married, most of the gifts she got were in the form of books, right? Classic books, all hardbound ones. So I grew up in that environment where we had a lot of books to our disposal, mostly Bengali. But again, my father read a lot of English books too, so did my mom. There was one specific book which my father mentioned when he was in college. It's called Exodus, right? I probably don't think that book is in print right now because it has a very turbulent past about Jewish history. So he once told me that when he was in college, he was reading that book, and so he went to one of the RECs in Rourkela, and he was studying engineering that time, mechanical. He said, I once skipped an entire day of class so I could finish this book, right? So he could stay back in the hostel and read the book. I'm just wondering, I mean, who would do it now? I have done that. I have once taken a leave because I really needed to finish a specific book. So that kind of influence is what my parents had. Bengali literature, obviously, as I said, right, those days when my parents got married in the late 70s, that time it was a culture to gift books, to show books in your library. Even the library that you see behind me right now, it's nothing compared to what my parents had, right? So I grew up with that kind of environment. Again, parents were influential, but my sister, who was older than me, she did not take that influence. She is not really a reader. So I was the only one who read like there was no tomorrow. So you have both sides of the coin. You have one sibling who is a reader and the other one who is not a reader. I mean, she reads, but probably not as much as I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that story and the idea of gifting people books and your bookshelf being like something you value above other things, and that's so different because I've not seen so many people say that they prize their bookshelf as much as they prize other possessions.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's the medals you've won or the prizes you've won or the fridge magnets, that you've the countries you've traveled to. But looking at your shelf in the back, I feel like that value has transferred onto you. You do prize and value your bookshelf, and you probably spend a lot of time curating and bringing those books together. And I completely relate to that emotion as a fellow reader myself. And I think the other issue you mentioned about the lack of public libraries, it's something we face even now today in a city like Mumbai, unfortunately. So that is, and I feel like joining Juhu Reads was one way I solved this problem because I was able to meet other readers and exchange books sometimes. So thank you for building and creating that community there. But now I'm curious about the Diya as a young girl growing up. What was that worldview like? I mean, books are a safe space, but at some point, kids also become adolescents and have to interact with the world. And you mentioned you grew up in so many different towns. I can't imagine that being very easy. Because as kids, you want a very stable, specific environment. You want to see the same faces every day. So moving between these towns, did you become a lot more flexible in terms of how you interact with people? Were you more introverted or extroverted? How did you take the stories from these books and use them to relate to people in the real world? So I'm thinking about your time in your early and late adolescent years and moving between those towns. So if you had to tell me a story about that, dear, like what comes to your mind now?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. So, I mean, when I was in my when I became a teenager, I think 12 plus 13, we were posted somewhere in MP, I remember. But despite us being kids who were, whose father, mostly the father, because Coal India primarily there were mostly men there, right? Now you have a lot of women, but back then it was mostly the fathers who were directing the course of their children's lives, where they would stay, etc. Right? Not it's different right now. But the common thread which bound all of us colony kids. So we used to live in a colony, right? Which was kind of demarcated between the roles your father held. So if your father was a senior person, then he probably had a bungalow. Somebody who was a little junior might have had a quarter, but it was kind of segregated in a way. However, that did not stop the children from mingling with each other, right? So even when my father was posted in Bengal, where we used to live in a bungalow and where there was no residences close by, our friends were the children who lived in the servants' quarters. I mean, I don't like to use the word servants' quarters, but this is something which the British had endowed on us. So we used to have these outhouses behind the bungalows, and there were children over there. So I remember coming back from school playing with them, and they never went to school because obviously they couldn't afford. And back in the 90s, I don't think that universal education was something which was really, talked about. So they used to wait for us to come back from school. My sister and I would just dump our bags in the house and just go and play with them. So I have grown up playing with all kinds, all strata of society, rich, poor, in between, everyone, literate, illiterate. It didn't really matter as long as you could play with them. But when we got transferred to MP, there I was thrown into the colony culture, where we had an entire colony of people across all age groups. And the plus side was none of us really bothered about what our parents did, whether my father was ahead of something or was not ahead. It never really mattered, right? We children were always, we never considered that even important to be, for us to even mingle with our friends over there. So that way, I think I was an extrovert. So was my sister. We had a lot of friends, both male and female, even children. And I remember during birthday parties, it was imperative for us to invite everybody in the colony. So you can imagine one birthday party, you would end up having 100, children as guests. It was like a nightmare for the parents, right? But it was the same for everyone. And all of us, we came in, and you need not have a fancy dinner, right? You could just have some, like some snacks like a samosa or a sweet or a cold drink, and that would be enough. Unlike these days where you really need to have a return gift, you spend lakhs and lakhs of rupees. So we never had those kind of an upbringing. We were just so simple, right? Even a small plastic tiffin box or even a rose could be a gift to a birthday party. But I would prefer to give books. But again, buying books in that place was difficult because there were no shops which would sell anything other than a textbook. So to buy a novel or a book of fiction, I would have to order it from some other town, like Delhi maybe for me, or Bhopal, which was close to where I live, Jabalpur. And that's how we grew up. So there was never any kind of a, like a class or a caste or some kind of a segregation. It was very open, very transparent, and we played with everybody. We played until midnight, early mornings, because it was all there were so many playgrounds where we lived, so many trees, gardens. There was no worry about being on the main road because the main roads were far away from where the colony was. So that's how we grew up. And that stayed on until I completed age 17, which is when I moved to Calcutta for my further education. But that's another very different story.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about that sheltered childhood reading books, and then this more open-ended sort of space where you're interacting with people beyond those books, and in these colony environments. But you mentioned that your father was an engineer, your mother was a homemaker, and then a teacher later on. So how did that have an influence on what you decided to study? And I know you're a consultant, you work for a prominent consulting firm today. But, as a teacher myself, one thing I always wonder is where did the roots of your career first set in? Because I'm thinking about you have 20 to 22 years where you're learning and you're in school and college and you're going through so many decisions, but it's in that the way it's structured in India is very early on you do specialize into streams, and you often go down that path. So what did you decide to study in high school and college, and how was that influenced by what you saw at home and what you saw growing up?
Well, if I look back, I think my entire career, so since I completed my class 12th until now, has been nothing but surprises. Nothing was planned. I did not plan to study what I planned to study. So there's a very interesting and kind of a sad story behind it also. So after I finished my 12th, while I was finishing, after my 10th, I realized that I was really interested in languages and literature. I wanted to study that. But where I lived, if I wanted to study arts in 11th and 12th, right? So you have science, arts, and commerce. If I chose arts, then I would be looked down upon because in that place where we lived, it was science, science, science everywhere. Commerce, okay, you can take commerce, but arts would be really, like this girl doesn't know anything, that's why she chose art. So for me, arts was never an option because of the societal pressure and the prejudice which was prevalent back in my town where I lived. So obviously commerce was the next option, and I went to Delhi Public School in a place called Vindhyanagar in MP, where I did my 11th and 12th in commerce, hoping that probably I would one day study languages after that. I still had mathematics as one of my core subjects and economics as well, but that was that. However, I wanted to study languages, as I mentioned before, and there was this newspaper advertisement about JNU advertising for an entrance test for their languages courses. I think they had these bachelors in French honors, Japanese, with a dual degree in English literature. And that seemed fascinating to me. So I forced my parents to get the form, and unlike now, that those days we had to really get the form offline. So you had to send them a letter, pay some money, get the form, then fill it up, and then send it to them again. So we did that process. I filled up the form, and I got an entrance test date. The exam was supposed to be held in Calcutta, so which was quite far from where we lived. But I gave the exam, and after a couple of weeks, I think I was selected. So the written exam I cleared, and then they asked me to come for an interview, and that was supposed to happen in JNU, the campus in Delhi itself. In between the arrival of the telegram, which announced my acceptance for the interview, somebody in my family, I can't take the name right now because it's a resource subject, they said, what will she do studying languages? There's no option for a girl. What will she do? She'll become a housewife then. I mean, these kind of prejudiced words were thrown at me. So my parents, despite being such highly educated people, they did not know what to do. So they said, don't go to JNU, right? So the JNU chapter was closed abruptly, although I really wanted to go there. I ended up going to Calcutta to study commerce. But by the time the end of August and September, the admissions to most of the good colleges were already over, right? Because I was too late. So I had no option but to study in a lesser known college there, which I'm not very proud of. But I think now that college has become prominent. So I did my BCom from University of Calcutta. And I didn't like it, but I had no choice. I had to finish a degree, right? After completing my BCom in Calcutta, I was sure that I didn't want to ask my father for money to fund my MBA. Those days, after bachelor's, MBA was something which everybody did, right? There was no clear career guidance. So I thought even if I do buy master's, I would do it with my own money. So I took up a job. This was around mid 2000s. I took up a job in Calcutta, and it was enough to pay my hostel bills and my paying guest bills because I was living in a paying guest at that time. And I saved some money, not a lot, a very less amount of money. And then I decided to move to Bombay because Bombay had more opportunities in the field of finance. So I came to Bombay. I applied for a job online. I got selected, and again that money which I earned in Bombay was enough to pay for my shared accommodation in a place called Powai in Bombay. So after that, even that job was something which was not planned. It just happened, and then I think I moved to the field of sustainability quite abruptly. I did not know that this would be the career choice for me for the next 15, 20 years. I just received a call from a consultant and I decided to apply. I gave the exam, the interview went well, and they selected me. This just happened randomly. There was no plan, there was no choice. So this happened around 2011, a couple of years after I came to Bombay. And since then, I think I have been in the same field, and consulting is something again which was never planned. I never imagined that I'll ever become a consultant. I was always a research person. So again, consulting happened abruptly. Somebody called me, a recruiter, do you want to apply? And I applied and I got selected. Now here I am. But I think throughout this entire journey, what has struck with me is never plan a lot. If you plan too much, it never materializes. So just take each day as it comes, and I'm sure something or the other will strike. Yeah.
And did those MBA plans materialize, or
I did, yeah. So in between, I took a year off. I finished an executive MBA from XIMB. and I funded that myself. I couple of bonus money which I received in my then organization. I had saved that money and I took the time off to finish my 1 year MBA.
Wow, that's quite inspiring, Dia, because looking back, it does seem like all of these things happened one after the other. But for a young person at that point of time to make some of those decisions, we don't have a culture where, kids start working quite early here in India. There's a focus on education or acquiring as much education as you can. So the fact that you made that decision and wanted to fund it yourself, does say a lot about who you are as an individual, right? And also, moving to another city, like people often speak about immigration in the context of moving to other countries, but I think within our country we have so much migration. And because each state and each city is so culturally and socially different, in terms of the political history, cultural history, the nature of cosmopolitanism, in like cities like Mumbai and Calcutta, they both have a very different energy and atmosphere. So you can't just, it's not like a fish jumping out of water and moving into another pond, right? These are like completely different settings, So as a young graduate, moving to Bombay in the early mid 2000s, what was, I think this was also the era when, social media was slowly setting in, the world was slowly transitioning into that technological sort of heavy sort of landscape. So what was Bombay like as a city for you? And I know you've spent like a good 15 plus years here now, so you can say that it's partly your home as well in a lot of ways, So is it home? Is it not home? How has Bombay as a city changed for you since you first moved here?
So I came to Bombay in the late 2000s, around 2009,
Okay.
8 or 9, I think. 8, I think, suppose I came to Bombay. Maybe couple of years after my graduation, I came to Bombay. And when I came, I remember, so my aunt was already in Bombay, my mother's younger sister. She's completely settled in Bombay. So she was another reason why I could take that step of moving to a new city. So the first 3 months I lived with her in Navi Mumbai, where she and her family they stay. And she was a big support back then. Eventually I thought that I need to move out myself. And thankfully the salary which I made back then, not a lot those days, but it was enough to pay for my shared accommodation. So one of my classmates from school, she was also in Bombay then. So we decided to pair up, and she and I, we rented an apartment and we started staying in Powai. That time, I think it was a much better place, Bombay. We still had construction going on everywhere, but I feel it was a much more, I would say, tolerant city. We still had, I don't think we had any of these kind of animosities that we have right now. But again, I think I was such a keen-eyed person. I was this, somebody who's come from a town which is not as big as Bombay. I was always, astounded and surprised by things I saw in Bombay. Everything shocked and surprised me at the same time. I was very naive also. I'm still naive, but I was much more naive then. So I loved it. It was not like being a fish out of water because of, I had a good job in Bombay and my one of my school friends was already here. So I kind of got used to it. And now, obviously, after so many years, Bombay is my home. I'm settled here. I have a house here. I don't think I can live in any other city now, despite its flaws and many of its construction, 24/7 construction going on. I still consider Bombay to be my home right now.
Yeah, like the idea of home, right? It's been explored so much in fiction, right? The end. I think I'm going back to your childhood, where you were moving around a lot, and now it's a lot more stable and you're in this one particular place, and you have characters in fiction that and these are things readers often do, right? They look at their own lives and they compare it to lives that they experience in the world of books, So what is the idea of home in your mind? What is home for you as an individual? Is it work? Is it family? Is it a comfortable space? How does that manifest itself in your mind?
I think home could be anything. Home could be a person. If you love someone, if you like someone, that person could become your home for that period of time. If you love a book, that book could become your home for that 15, 20 days of reading the book. Right now, this apartment, this room is my home. When I go to Durgapur, then Durgapur becomes my home because anyway, my parents live there now. So that is my home. If I travel to, I was in Europe recently, that time for 3 weeks, that became my home. That apartment became my home. That Airbnb became my home. So for me, home keeps on changing, right? It doesn't have to be like a brick and a mortar place. It could be a person, it could be a book, it could be a tree, it could be these plants behind me right now, which are also kind of my temporary home. So my home keeps on changing. And I think for readers, especially readers of fiction, right? When we read a book, the places that the author takes us through, they also become a temporary home. So some of the fiction which I have read recently in the last couple of years, I think they gave me a sense of home. But yeah, for me, home doesn't matter. It need not be a specific city, or it can be anywhere. It can keep on changing.
And that idea of an Indian identity, Diya, like in your mind, like when you introduce yourself and tell people where you're from, like what are some things that come to your mind in terms of your identity as an Indian? We're recording this on Independence Day as well, and I'm just curious, because I identify as a South Indian staying in Mumbai. I speak three different languages, but I am from a particular community in South India on the coast of Karnataka, and that's where my mother tongue and cultural roots are set. But I'm an out and out Mumbaiker. I don't see myself settling down anywhere else. So, like, what is that for you when you tell people about where you're from?
Yeah, that has always been a question. So I say that I'm a part of every city in this country. I don't, although I speak Bengali, because that's my mother tongue, but I don't think that I am a Bengali in the real sense because I have never lived a lot of my life in Bengal. And I mean, even for Bombay, I don't think I'm a Mumbaiker either. I think I'm a person of the world. I can settle in Bangalore tomorrow and, still not be a part of Bangalore. So for me, the sense of, I mean, I had to explain to people where I am from. So I would say that, my father had a transferable job. So I lived and grew up all across India. But essentially, I'm a provincial person. Even if you put me in Bombay or Delhi or anybody, I would still be a provincial girl. I'm a country girl by heart. I may have a fancy job and a fancy title and a fancy home, but essentially I am a country girl. And I think you can never take a country girl from her roots, no matter where you put them. So I'm very much a country person.
So, on your trip to Europe, did you spend a lot of time in the countryside or was it the big cities?
I mean, I lived in big cities, but I mostly visited museums and libraries and anything which had a historical past. So I don't like those fancy buildings, all that stuff. So I was mostly in these places only.
Hmm. But I'm curious about your life in the field of sustainability strategy, Dia. For a young person listening to this, or maybe some of your younger friends, curious about what it's like to be in the world of consulting, without mentioning names, if you could, give me a glimpse of what your life looks like on a day-to-day basis and how it has changed over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of, you know, being a graduate, a fresher, and then moving through this world and, becoming more senior in this particular context. I mean, my question basically goes back to what's it like to be in the consulting world from the outside.
Yeah, so I had never imagined, as I told you before, I had never imagined that I'll become a consultant. For me, consulting was that thing which was completely different from what I as a person was, right? So consulting happened to me by chance 3 years ago. Back in 2022, I joined the world of consulting. And after joining consulting, I realized that you might have a fancy degree, you might have a fancy, education, but in the end, in consulting, what matters most is empathy, how you are able to relate to people, how good of a storyteller you are, how are you using your own intelligence to talk to your clients, right? So even if you have had an engineering degree or an MBA degree from a fancy place, some of it matters, but in the end, in the world of consulting, it's all about on the spot the decisions that you make. So for me, what has worked is I think I am a good storyteller. I think I can relate to people well. I think I'm a good mentor. I think, or I have been told by people that I'm a good mentor. So these kind of skills and being empathetic always, never being judgmental, never micromanaging. I have never micromanaged anybody. I have managed a lot of teams, big teams globally. Micromanagement is something I totally don't believe in. Because I know that everybody has something to bring to the table. And as a leader, it's my duty to let them speak up, let their voices be heard without trying to put in my opinions on them. And this has borne well for me. And I think being open minded and being very honest about yourself really is the icebreaker. I mean, I can't pretend, really. Even when I talk to clients, I can't pretend. I mean, obviously, with clients, you have to be a little cautious, but within the firm, when you talk to each other, you have to be yourself, right? Just be yourself, trust your own gut, involve your own intelligence. So, if you are good at something, let's say you're good. I mean, I read a lot of books, right? So, sometimes I try to strike conversations up with my colleagues over books. And that is a really heartwarming thing because they see your true self. They know that you're not pretending. So for me, being empathetic, being understanding, not judging people unknowingly, knowingly not judging people, and always remaining calm in the midst of chaos is what is important in our world of consulting. And being aware of things that's happening around you. You just don't need to talk about your subject, but know everything that's happening around. It's like a general knowledge question bank, right? So if you appear for a test, you need to have knowledge about everything around yourself. So that's how consulting is different from the other areas of work which I have worked in so far.
Yeah, because when I hear you say that, Diya, I'm wondering, um, it goes back to all those skills you acquired as a reader, being empathetic, you know, being in the shoes of the other person, and I'm wondering, like thinking about that decision where you did not study arts and you studied something else. It's somehow like you've come back full circle, in a way you have to also I'm thinking about the correlations between reading a book and working with a client, right? In both these cases, you have to embed yourself in those worlds and try to put yourself in their shoes and look at the world from that eye. So I see so many transferable skills in the idea of reading fiction and, engaging with people in, a consulting context, though you have to have a little more business acumen and technical knowledge in this particular context. So that's quite interesting in terms of how that came full circle for you, and this the skills that you developed as a reader are in some way being applied here. So yeah, I know you've been someone that curates. I mean, you're one of the co-curators of Juhu Reads, which is a silent reading community. And I found out about Juhu Reads through an Instagram post when I moved back to Mumbai. And I was just so fascinated by the idea as a reader. And I've been here for 10 plus years, and I've always longed and looked for communities of other readers, and there were book clubs, but nothing as consistent, as active as I saw with Juhu Reads. So before you jump into Juhu Reads, can you tell our listeners and the viewers a little bit about the idea of a silent reading community and where did it first, originate, or the history of it, and what do people do in a silent reading community?
So I think before I started Juhu Reads, I had no idea. I mean, I had some idea. So Cubbon Reads, which is the parent reads chapter for all the silent reading communities that end with the name of the place and reads. Juhu Reads, for example. So we all have come from the origination of Cubbon Reads. So Cubbon Reads was founded by Harsh, and Harsh is somebody I have known for a while now. I mean, my parents know his parents, and I have also known him for a while. So when he started Cubbon Reads in Bangalore, he was looking for an opportunity to also have some chapters in Bombay. And I remember he had shared the Instagram story, and then he said, I'm looking for people in Bombay. So obviously I volunteered because I knew him, and that's how Juhu Reads was born. But the idea of a silent reading community, when we say silence, it means that it's just you and the books, right? There's no distraction of a phone, there's no distraction of people talking. I mean, although we have people talking, when we are reading when we are reading at Juhu Reads, for example, but the idea is to just focus on the book for the duration of time. Don't let the external world, affect your reading, especially technology, especially phones, unless you're reading on a phone or a tablet. But I prefer reading physical books because it gives me that kind of a connection with the book, and that's what it is. Just read in silence and don't talk to anyone, don't look at your phone. I don't think I have been able to really do that so successfully. I tend to look at my phone now and then when I'm reading at a silent reading community, but the idea was to keep it silent.
Yeah, because I most of us are so familiar with the idea of a book club where people read a book and they come and they discuss the book, or it could be on a theme, and we have some of those in most cities. But as someone that is a participant, I've been a member of Jew Reads for about around a year now, a little less than a year, and I think it's such a fascinating idea, because in this world filled with technology, I think one of the struggles many of us that live in big metros have is the lack of third spaces that are not commercialized. In a lot of ways, like coffee shops have taken over that thing, but there's always a commercial element to it. And you can't just exist in these spaces without sometimes engaging in a commercial transaction. So I think growing up in a world where there was less technology, I think you had to move out of your homes to interact with people because you couldn't lean on technology, right? And I remember a world where I think I was the mid generation, where my early childhood, we would just spend time outdoors, and then social media came in, and we just stopped wanting to go outside and spend more time interacting on these networks. So I saw a bit of both those worlds, and I wish I spent more time in that first world. And I think there are benefits in both and disadvantages in both, but the idea of a third space where people can just exist together um, is something that people really long for in today's world. And I think Jew Reads is, in a lot of ways, that space, So tell me about Juhu Reads now. Like I know you were, as you said, you were inspired by Cubbon Reads, but 100 meetings. That's such an amazing achievement there. I can't and and just for the viewers listening in as a participant, you can tell us about that too. But there is a lot of work involved in terms of turning up every week. Making sure everyone's comfortable because I noticed that the curators talk to the new readers. You have a little ritual at the end as well where you make sure everyone is included, and some of you go off, some of the readers go off and meet up at a coffee shop. So what was your memory and experience of doing this 100 times, every week for the last 2 or so years? Tell us some stories about people you have met, challenges you have faced, and your journey as the curator of Juhu Reads.
Wow. There are so many stories. I mean, when we started, so our first session happened on 20th of May 2023. That was when we first started, and the challenges were plenty. So back then, it was me and Rachna Balotra, who was my co-curator. So she had, in fact, zeroed in on Cafe Azmi Park as the venue for Juhu Reads, and then we both came together. We kind of came and saw the place. We felt it was a good spot for us, and then we started reading. When we started reading, we got lot of flack from the park authorities. The security guards, they almost threw us out. They kept on bothered us. They were abusive. Also, I mean, you can't even imagine what I have gone through in the first initial 3 months, right? So back then, there was a lot of media coverage as well, which we got along with Cupboard Reads and the other Reads chapters. So the media coverage helped us in a bit that the park authorities realized that these people are harmless because they have never seen a group of people reading together. They thought we were trying to do something illegal over there, which was not the case. So we got a lot of flack. I had lots of arguments with the park people. And I remember back then, our prime minister in 2023 made a tweet about Carbon Reads on now X. It was Twitter back then. He was applauding the group of Carbon Reads for meeting, I mean, for 500 people coming into a park and reading. So I used that tweet as a reference to the security people at Cafe Azmi Park in Juhu where we meet, and I told them, if the Prime Minister has no problem in people meeting in a park, why are you objecting? And from then onwards, it was a smooth ride. They were very friendly. Now you see, they know all of us. Whenever we go to the park, the people, they know us. But the initial 6 months were very difficult. A lot of challenges. Sometimes even the police was called, right, to throw us out of the park. But I always stood my ground, and with the help of other readers, we were able to sit there and read. So that was a big challenge. The good part of Juhu Reads is amazing. We had a lot of media coverage, as I said earlier, right? So the media coverage helped people bring in. And sometimes people only came because they wanted to be featured in a story, right? So we had one newspaper, they came with a lot of photographs, they came with a photojournalist and they took photos of us. That point, some people came only to be photographed and they were not seen thereafter. So the group that we have right now is the core group. The people who used to come back then, none of them are here except for me. And there were days in which I was the only one who turned up. So Rachna, who was my co-curator back then, she left after the first couple of months of some other engagement, so she was not there. So I would sometimes be the only one to read in the park. There was nobody else. Maybe one more person was there. So I think the biggest, the reason why Juhu Reads is what it is right now is because of the consistency that we have shown. We never cancelled a single session, unlike the other Reads chapters, which keep on cancelling sessions because the curators are traveling. So even I have been traveling. But even when we are traveling, there is somebody else from the community who is there to show up, take the photos, and I mean, for us, the main thing is to take the photos together towards the end after the reading, right? So a community needs to continue without the founders being there. So if tomorrow I am not there or my current co-curators are not there, Juhu Reads will still continue. There will be somebody else who will probably continue with the baton ahead. So I think that has helped us, and more than the 110 sessions we have had so far, I think people find this to be a safe space. A lot of people have told us, introverted readers, that Juhu Reads has given us the freedom to come and read without being judged. Unlike in a book club where you need to read a certain book, here you can just read anything, even the back of a shampoo bottle, right? So that non-judgmental angle is very important. And a lot of people have come and told us that, I'm suffering from some kind of a mental ailment, depression, sadness, etc. But coming to Juhu Reads, we feel so much better, right? So that I think is the biggest reward for me and for my current co-curators, that we are able to give people a safe space, a non-judgmental, a non-biased space to read what.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And it was that kind of space for me as well, like to meet new people, make new friends, but also fall back in love with reading, and I think I've shared this with you before that I was in a reading slump, getting back um, to Mumbai. But once I joined Juhu Reads, I think over the last year, I just got excited about reading again. It was like reading when I was a child, and, this world of books. Because when you are at one of these sessions, you often see other people reading certain books, and you're like, oh, that may be interesting. And when you briefly hear them talk about it, you're like, the way they spoke about it, it's I could consider that. And many of the books I picked up were actually recommended by other Jew Reads readers, and I think it's also the community aspect of reading, like I think a recommendation by a person saying it to me is so much more valuable than something I get through an ad on another website, because I can see this person associate their own life experience with the book. It's not just something that someone is trying to sell me, they're talking about a true life experience. And I find that so much more powerful than a review or a book recommendation on a personal level, so yeah, thank you so much for creating this space, Dia. And I feel like I know you've done a lot of work to nurture it. And shout out to the other co-curators, Prashant, Shrishti, and Shishir, who all of you all are doing such a great job sustaining and building this community. I know you all have also done some other events apart from meeting up. Like recently, you all had an event at the local bookstore here called Fictionary, where it was a talk with two wonderful writers, Rohit and Anukriti, and you all also recently came out with a new logo, which is a picture of the park, and there's a little cat because Kefi Azmi Park has a lot of cats that you see when you are over there. So for all the listeners tuning in, I will be linking Juhu Reads' Instagram page. All the details about their meetings and their future meetups will be on that Instagram page. I think the best part about that page is you get to see pictures of the books people have read over all these meetings. And the timing that they meet is pretty consistent. The information is on that page. So, yes, please do follow this conversation with maybe meeting Dia and some of the other curators at one of their meetups. And I think Juhu Reads was one of the early sort of leaders, but now we have a lot of other reading communities. I think the larger conversation is around building a reading culture in our cities, which I think Juhu Reads was really a leader for. So, Dia, like we've spoken about Juhu Reads, we've spoken about your life in consulting, your childhood. It's been a wonderful conversation, but I know you have a special passion, and more recently, you've been reviewing a lot of books in the South Asian context, writers of Indian origin writing stories in English or in other languages, but translated into English. I read your review, and I know you also review books for Scroll and a few other platforms, and I loved reading your reviews because you do such a great job covering so many aspects of what it means to write a review, whether it's the social cultural background of where this book is being placed. I remember in your Tiger Lessons review, which was a book that you read, you spoke about an incident where the person had this close association with the animals, like the sheep in his context. And I found that so interesting to build an interest in why that topic was important, So tell me about some of the books in a South Asian context that you have loved. If you can give us 4 to 5 recommendations, and in the words of a professional book reviewer, tell us a little bit about why someone should read these books, or what stood out for you as a reader about these books.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. So initially, I think pre 2022, I was not really a big fan of reading contemporary Indian literature. Unlike a lot of people now, I was exposed only to books written by foreign authors, right? So I never really explored that part. But since 2022, I visited the Jaipur Literature Festival. I was there for a couple of days. I met and spoke to so many amazing Indian contemporary writers, Anukriti being one of them, Saikat Majumdar being one of them. That's when I met them first. And when I read their books, I realized, my God, this is a treasure trove. Why don't we speak more about contemporary Indian writers and also South Asian writers? Since then, I don't think I have read a single book which is not written by a contemporary Indian or South Asian writer, because I feel the way they convey the way India is, right. We have so many languages, we have so many kind of people who live here, and the way they write about these people into English is something which makes it unique. So if you ask me to name a couple of books which I would really recommend people to read, I think the top four would be The Firebird by Saikat Majumdar. That is an amazing book. It's a dark book, but this book really, really, really brought out Calcutta of the 80s and a young boy's tryst with his mother's life as a theatre actress. I think this is a book which everybody must read. And I also heard that this book is going to be made into a movie, so all the more reason to read. The second book which I would recommend is Rohit Manchanda's on, I think, A Speck of Coal Dust. It was published in the 90s in some other name, but the new name is A Speck of Coal Dust. This book again is an exact place of where I grew up, in the coal mining areas of Jharkhand and Bihar. I think Rohit, the author, is also from that area. So this is one book which I would highly, highly recommend to anybody who wants to know what life was living in those areas. The third book is Siddhant Dhanvant Sanghavi's first book, forgetting the name if you can remember. I think it was no, not Lost Flamingos. His first book for which he won the Betty Trask Award. I have the book behind me in the library, can't remember the name. So that was his first book. That is something you must read. Anukriti Upadhyay is a bilingual writer. Her short story collection called Blue Women is again set in I mean, there's a big feature of Bombay in that. So she has written 7 to 8 short stories around women who have very different lives. So that's another recommendation. So these are the fiction books which I would really request or urge your viewers to read from the contemporary Indian South Asian perspective. And your second question was on book reviews, right? So
Yeah.
how do I write book reviews? I think the first book review, I have written book reviews without any platform on my social media. I've been writing for a while now. But since 2023, I've been writing for Scroll, obviously, and a few other places. So as a reviewer, you need to have a really clear mind that you can't be biased. For example, I have been seeing that a lot of people who write reviews, if their friend is a writer and you are reviewing their book, then automatically you want to give it a good review, right? So thankfully for me, I don't have any friends in the writing world, which is why my review can be unbiased. And if I like a book, I'll probably, write good about it. But the idea is to be balanced, right? So you can't just talk about the book. You have to talk about the flaws as well as the good parts of the book. So there is, if you read Tiger Lessons, right, you might have seen that I have also mentioned a couple of negative points which I found in the book, but also the positive ones. There's another book review of mine which is going to come up in the next, I think maybe tomorrow or the next week. So we need to have a balanced view. And as a reviewer, we need to try and also refer to other books in that same context. So whenever I write a review, I always mention other books, right? I mean, these books don't just stand. If you don't mention another book in a review, how will we know about other books, right? So, in Tiger Lessons, I mentioned a couple of other books. The reviews I wrote before that, I mentioned a couple of other books. Even my forthcoming reviews, I have tried to at least compare the writing style or the plot or the theme with other books. So, if you want to review books, make sure you bring in as many books as you can in that review rather than just focusing on the book itself.
Yeah, those are good, suggestions for someone that is curious about doing that. And I know, more recently, a lot of young reviewers have used Instagram as a platform to share these book reviews. But I think it's something that is really important in terms of pushing forward the cultural conversation around books, right? Because every individual will have their own reading of what a book is supposed to mean. And I think the more perspectives we get, the better, because it's so important for us as individuals to discuss stories, and not just let them, because that's how we bring them to life. And, book clubs, reading communities, reviewers are really trying to go back to that core purpose of adding, um, more life to these stories, because I don't think it's only about the books that are published recently. There are so many classics, so many other writers that need to be rediscovered and given that attention again. And I know you mentioned that at one of the Juhu Reads meetings, like there are so many Indian writers whose work was published and it just disappeared, because there wasn't as much of a hype around it, or the big media houses or reviewers were not covering it. So I think it falls on us, falls on you, like younger reviewers and smaller reviewers, to give that life. For the final question, Dia, we've spoken about a lot of things, but to end this conversation, what I wanted to ask you is, um, why do you think someone should be a reader? Or for you, how has reading in some way been an important part of your identity? Like, how do you think it's added value to your life? For because I have a lot of friends that someone sometimes say, why do you read? You can just watch a movie, or you can watch a book or do something like that. So off the top of your head, because you've been a reader for so long, can you tell me a few reasons you think reading has brought joy to your life and some ways it's changed you?
That's a great question. I think for me, reading is, I mean, if you are a reader, and I'm specifically talking about reading fiction because that's what I read most. If you read fiction, you are aware of how difficult life can be for other people. You can be more empathetic. You will know the challenges what everybody faces. If you're, and it'll also equip you emotionally to handle things in a better way. So if you read about more characters, about more lives, whether in India or outside India, you know that okay, if I ever come across this kind of a situation in life, how do I maneuver it, right? So reading has given me that kind of a, I would say, an armament to wear when I know that there are challenges ahead of me and how I need to navigate those. So reading has made me a better person. I won't say that all the books I've read have been happy books. Some of them were really dark and sad. But even in those sad moments, those sad parts of the book, they have enriched me as a person, right? I think I'm more empathetic because of that. I think I am less judgmental because of that. I think I can relate to animals more because of that. I think I love greenery more because of the books that I have read. And obviously, at my work right now, a reader can never run out of ideas, right? You will always have something to talk about. You can always hold a conversation. And I think it also makes us more emotionally mature because you read so much, you know that anything can happen, right? So that's what sets us apart from non readers. And I would highly encourage people who want to start reading, start with something really small and tiny, maybe a small book, anything, no judgments on the genre that you're reading, but do read. It'll make you a better person. And especially in the age of AI, which is going to take a lot of our jobs, if you read more, you will have a better vocabulary, you will have a better understanding of how to tell a story, and that will probably help you in also safeguarding your job in the future.
Oh, and on that note, we come to an end of this episode of Learning Stories. I will be linking all the recommendations that Diya mentioned in this conversation. I'll also be linking the Instagram page for Juhu Reads, which is the community that Diya runs. And right now, they meet every Saturday at a park in Juhu called Kefi Azmi Park from 5 to 7. But please follow their Instagram for latest updates on their events. Thank you again for tuning in. And the reason I started this podcast was to, again, create a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet. And as we saw in Diya's journey, like in addition to her professional role and professional journey, she went out of her way to create another community, a safe space for readers. And she's done that for so long with the other co-curators. And, it's not something that she necessarily had to do, but it's something that she takes a lot of pride in. And I think it's become a safe space for so many readers in this city. So I'd really like to thank all those silent reader communities, curators, that take a lot of their personal time to build these safe spaces for us readers. Your work is important, and it really is meaningful to a lot of us readers that want those spaces. So until next time, Diya, thank you again for making time for this. And stay tuned for more such stories from this podcast. And this is Abhishek Shetty signing off on this episode of Learning Stories.